Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of Tactical Tuesday. Today on the docket, we got a couple hands from some big Los Angeles live streams that you may or may not have heard of. One is from Live at the Bike. The other is from Hustler Live. These were hand-picked by my co-pilot for Tactical Tuesday, Jon. What's up, Jon? How you doing, man?
How's it going? Start of football season. How are you doing?
Not so good. Not so good. We're recording this at 4:30 p.m. on a Sunday, even though this is Tactical Tuesday. And as a Titans fan, I would say it hasn't started out super well. Not only has it not started out super well, Coach Thomas is blasting me in fantasy football as well and talking mad shit in the private channel. So
you're playing Coach Thomas this week? Week one?
Week one,
Wow.
Thomas is talking trash about how one of his players might outscore my entire team.
Ooh.
The player specifically is the number one overall pick in the draft. He's very skillful for choosing Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
He should start a fantasy football training site with those ridiculous prescient picks. Yes, I'm extremely salty, and he can't talk to defend himself. So here we are.
So just so the audience knows, we're gonna have a tilted Coach Brad analyzing these hands.
Yes, I am salty today, to say the least. So let's dive in to these hands. We're gonna start out with a hand from Live at the Bike. Jon, do you want to break down the action for the viewer?
Yeah. So this hand, I believe they're playing like 100, 200, or like 50, 100, 200. Anyways, the big blind is $200. JD opens Queen 10 offsuit to 800. James wakes up with aces in the cutoff and puts in a pretty standard size 3-bet. This is where the hand starts getting a little wacky, honestly. Andy wakes up in the straddle with pocket kings and decides to just flat the 3-bet. I was listening to the audio, the commentary for this hand, and the commentators seem to imply that like JD had some reason to be tilted before the start of this hand. He started the hand with exactly $12,000, so I think it's very possible that maybe he got stacked very maybe right before this hand and just reloaded for 12K, and thought that maybe Andy is trapping kings here with the hopes that JD would find some sort of 4-bet, or just rip in his 12K stack over the 3-bet, and he'd be able to kind of put James in a tough spot if James decides to flat or do something with after 3-betting. So already sort of off to kind of a strange start here with Andy just flatting the kings pre-flop.
Do we know anything about James specifically? Because it could be that James, he is an elderly gentleman, and so is it possible that James just has such a tight 3-bet range that Andy doesn't have a 4-bet range versus a James 3-bet?
I mean, okay, so from what I know about James is he's a regular on these high stakes games on Live at the Bike. He plays very, very frequently. I'm going to assume that he's not a professional or like never was a pro. But I think he's, like you said, like his 3-bet range is certainly going to be tighter than it should be. That being said, like I still can't see Andy not 4-betting kings just as the standard play, even versus a 3-bet from James. Like I don't think James is someone who only has like aces, kings, queens, and ace king. I think he's going to at least have some more hands than like the ultra tight rec player 3-bet range.
I mean, we'd have to ask Andy, to know what his
right.
strategy construction is here. We can't know. I think the commentators, they're speculating in the same way that we're speculating, and I think that they're very deep here. Right? This is a pretty deep spot. It's a 3-bet pot already to Andy, and I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how he's constructing his pre-flop strategy. I do know that he called very quickly though, which means that he kind of knows what he's doing in this spot for some reason or another, whether it be the read that like, the 12K stack's just gonna jam it in. Although, facing a 3-bet and then a cold flat, like you would have to think that the 12K stack is going to be a little hesitant to just put their stack in no matter how tilted they are.
Yeah. So just to like ask you a question then, if you were playing in a live game and you were very deep against let's say a recreational player that you knew to be very, very tight, maybe even tighter than James was, would you be flatting kings like against someone like that because of depth and because of their 3-bet range not being as wide as it should be? Just thinking like it's kind of a disaster if we get 5-bet here at this depth and
well, I mean, we have to think about like how are we constructing our 4-bet range, right? Like how many combos do we have when you 4-bet a tight player cold? And if you are 4-betting like aces, kings, queens, and ace king, then you don't have enough combos post flop at the depth that these guys are going to have if you do 4-bet. And so it's like this kind of a conundrum of, do I just want to have a somewhat wide flatting range here of the 3-bet, something like, I don't know, 8s plus and some like suited Broadway hands like that, and then see a flop like with a somewhat high SPR with more combos, or do I want to 4-bet and have a high SPR spot with less combos? And my personal preference is to have more combos when the SPR post flop is going to be quite high. I just think it gets very difficult to play. And, this hand, we'll get into a spot a little bit later on that's going to kind of bring this problem of one opponent not having enough combos in their range with a high SPR to light.
All right, I'm gonna press you a little bit more on this. So then why not just 4-bet way more hands? Like why not just cold 4 like a normal cold 4 range? Like mine would have like king jack suited plus, ace queen offsuit, ace queen suited, ace jack suited.
Well, you mentioned a very tight player, right? Are these hands that you want to be opening the action so that villain can basically, so the villain can deny your post flop equity, or do you want to see flops and get future data points on a villain that's very readable? My preference would be to realize my equity and get future data points.
Gotcha. So would you 4-bet aces?
Aces, probably.
Yeah, that's like the only one.
Yeah, it's like exploited. I mean, maybe, yeah, aces are pretty much the only one.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
Villain's super tight, and I'm going to 4-bet much bigger than I normally would as well.
Okay. All right. So Andy flats. I believe JD flats as well. And get to a pretty cooler of a flop.
Yeah, poor JD. He got the middle pair there.
Hey, with a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw.
Yeah, so king of clubs, 10 of diamonds, and 4 of clubs. So Andy has flop top set. James has aces. JD, he has his middle pair here. The action goes, they check to James, and now there's $7,300 in the pot. Like I mentioned before, Andy has pretty much 100K, and James has Andy covered. James bets 4,000 into 7,300. I guess we'll start there. Size of James' bets. Any thoughts?
I mean, this is like, I don't know, for online sizes go, this would be like pretty large multi-way, but again, like sizes live, especially when you're a gazillion big blinds deep, definitely trend larger than like what I'm used to seeing online. I don't know. I think I would assume like James is going to have lots of hands that want to c-bet this flop. He's going to have tons of king X. He's going to have flush draws. He's going to have combo draws. I don't know if he even c-bets his 10X. And then obviously aces.
Yeah. So what about Andy here deciding to flat? And then I do want to point out that the queen 10 just folded to a bet on the flop here, which
A bet and a call.
a bet and a call, right? But it still leads me to believe that like dude's not just steaming and looking to like light his money on fire here.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I'm actually like curious to ask you about like Andy's call here. Like, given all the discussion that we had pre-flop about like, okay, like why not check raise here when you have top set and we're putting James on a really, really tight range?
I would check raise here.
Yeah.
I think that you just kind of have to check raise here. I don't know. James, Andy gets, we've shown the turn at this point. So the turn's a 5 of clubs, but like when James bets 3 ways on the flop, and this is kind of what I was talking about as it relates to combos, James isn't betting a lot of hands on this board 3 ways with one player having a short stack. So like James is kind of signaling already once he bets that like I've got a hand that I'm willing to get it in versus the short stack with.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many hands that are that confident, especially if you're Andy, because Andy has 2 kings. So like James has ace king, James has aces, and then maybe James has
combo draws,
ace queen, ace jack of clubs, some hand like that.
Ace 10 of clubs.
Against all of those hands, you want to put more money in the pot right now with a set of kings. Maybe he even has a set of 10s too. Like maybe that's another hand that
that's a good
3
one.
bets and then bets. So I think I think Andy should check raise here. I don't, I just think it's, I don't love the decision to flat. I think you should just check raise.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that I'll say that in Andy's defense that might have been going through his head is that he's still thinking that JD is a little tilted and like might just rip his stack in here and then get James to call and then or call or raise or do something and then be able to put in the raise or be able to put James in like a really tough spot after that. So maybe that's what he was thinking. If that's what he was thinking pre-flop, unfortunately, that's not what happens for Andy.
Well, even if that's like the narrative that you have pre-flop, you have to be able to recalibrate and adjust based on the situation in front of you. I mean, James has 100,000. JD has 10. I think it's pretty clear that like maximizing value from James is a higher priority than getting the 10K from JD.
Yeah. What I was saying though was that like he might be able to do both if JD puts in the 10K, right? Like, he knows that James probably has a hand that he's not going to fold, and like, maybe he's just like, well, they'll never put me on a set, like just flatting this flop and et cetera, et cetera.
It's kind of asking a lot when you've got top set for JD to have a hand that just jams the flop, right? Like JD needs to have like basically some sort of flush draw or queen jack to just kind of get the money in.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's just a low frequency thing. You're asking JD to jam. I think it's low frequency. It's not going to happen that often. James is signaling, hey, I got a good hand. Like, let's just take the big prize here and check raise big on the flop.
Yeah. Okay. So JD does fold. The turn is the 5 of clubs, which completes the club flush draw. Andy does not have a club. James has the ace of clubs in his hand. Andy starts out with a check and James bets 7,000, which is just a hair under half pot. So James essentially goes half pot, half pot.
Mm-hmm.
And this was another part of the hand that I was surprised by. I would have expected Andy to call once the clubs get there. But Andy decides to go for a small check raise, I believe, to 19K.
Yeah, so why do you think Andy went for a raise here on the flush completing turn? And for the podcast listeners, the board is king of clubs, 10 of diamonds, and the 4-5 of clubs. Andy's got top set. James has aces with the ace of clubs.
I mean, you mentioned kind of before we started recording that Andy very likely is reading into James's sizing, and that when James half pots the turn, he very unlikely that he has a flush. I'm assuming what you're saying and what Andy might be thinking is that James would go bigger than half pot whenever he has a flush. Yeah, I mean that's all I can think of. The check raise size is also really small. I don't know, just a lot of stuff about this turn play was kind of perplexing to me.
Yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure. I guess the first part of it, I think that once James bets the flush completing turn, again, combinatorically, he only has so many hands here. If you have a tight 3-betting range, and then you bet 3 ways on the flop. So, you don't have a ton of combos. And if we go back to the size of the pot on the turn, it was like 15K and James bet 7. And, Andy had about 90 behind. So, like, you have a somewhat high SPR. James doesn't have that many hands. And if James chooses to blast turns when he turns the nut flush, like with 3/4 or pot size bet, it's not exactly rocket science to figure out that, like, James only has a few hands, ace king with the ace of clubs or aces. In which case you can just raise for value here. The small sizing is kind of strange, but I mean, I guess if those are the hands that you're targeting, maybe you don't want to just blast it. But this kind of goes back to the fundamental problem on the flop, right? Of, oh, so now Andy's like slow played and now we have a flush completing turn. Now you're check raising, and instead of like the flop when you're threatening with 6 combos, now you're threatening with a shit ton of combos where flush is complete.
Right.
And now James with his range is likely to just start being very defensive.
Right. I agree. And when you said that, like, are you assuming, am I correct? Like when I heard you say that, like you think James would not bet the turn without the ace of clubs, so like he wouldn't bet red ace king on the turn. You're
I
guessing?
have no idea. I think so. I think that's the case, but I'm not exactly sure. I do think that like these flush completing turns are under bet with like red ace king, and so like when he does bet here, I would expect him to have the ace of clubs. And I expect him to have aces here like quite often, or ace king with the ace of clubs. Though that's pretty much his range, and you don't have many hands here. This is kind of the inherent problem when you don't have many combos in a spot. You kind of are forced to defend most all of your combos, or he's going to feel forced to defend all of his combos. Whether he should or not, I guess that's a different question.
Gotcha. Okay. So James pretty quickly calls the turn bet, which makes sense. I mean, he has an overpair and nut flush draw on the turn. Can't imagine folding, getting 3.5 to 1.
Yeah, he's getting pretty much direct odds.
Right.
And for what it's worth, I don't love James's decision to bet the turn. I think that's something that we didn't even really talk about. But with the aces with the ace of clubs, I'm just checking back and playing it for 1 bet. I think it's kind of ambitious asking the cold 3-better to call twice with, the best you can expect is king queen when you have aces.
Yeah. Maybe Andy has some ace. Yeah, that's right. He's walking 2 aces.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough ask getting 2 streets of value.
Yeah, I'm also, I don't know if this is what you were saying, but like I'm also in the camp of checking back my aces with the ace of clubs and being way more likely to bet red aces on the turn.
James does make the call, like we said, because it's pretty easy call. You've got almost direct odds. The river is the tray of hearts, so just an effective blank. It doesn't pair the board, and James does not improve, so Andy still with his top set and is first to act here on the river. Jon, what do you think? Andy's going to bet. What do you think of Andy's sizing here? There's 53,300 in the pot, and Andy sets out a glob of chips that ends up being
about 2/3 pot, I think.
Yeah, about $38,000. Yeah, leaving himself with 34,000 behind.
Yep. I mean, this is like a pretty standard size on the river, I guess. I suppose he's targeting like aces and ace king and king queen type hands. I guess James could, like you said, could also have like pocket tens and like getting the max from like a hand like pocket tens is definitely important. I don't know if he's I don't know. Like I don't know if he's thinking about like what types of bluffs he would have here. I know like in live poker that's significantly less of a consideration than online. I don't know. I guess I'm fine with the size at the end of the day.
No. I think you should go smaller. I think it's greed, but maybe Andy has a good idea of, James's threshold for calling a river bet. I think Andy has very few natural bluffs, all close to zero at this spot. And on the flush completing turn, like, you just kind of have to dial it back on the river when you have very few bluffs and villain has a capped range, and we're very aware of what villain's range ought to be. I would just bet a third personally.
Yeah. I honestly, like, I mean, like, I don't know much about James. Like, I don't know how he would play actual flushes on the turn, but like, I sort of disagree that like villain has a capped range. Like, I think, if he flats the nut flush on the turn and you just put in half your stack on the river, like, I don't know, you could just be put in some like completely disgusting spots when you get jammed on for the other half of your stack and you have top set, like by, someone you presume is not bluffing the river very often, if ever.
Maybe, but I mean, I think this is James's strategy here. We don't know how he plays flushes on the turn. I don't know whether or not he's flatting all of his flushes, and so whether his range is capped. But I mean, even if it is uncapped, we still made the same argument for betting smaller rather than larger, right?
Yeah. Also, like, I guess like one other thing that I will say that sort of I think lends credence to your assumption that James is capped. I think it's one thing that I noticed was the way James called on the turn was kind of like he's sort of curious. Like, it wasn't like an excited, like, okay, let's put this 12K in. And he was just like, okay, let's think about this for a second. And like, it did seem like he was concerned about not having the best hand on the turn, just given the way he called. So, if Andy can read into that and just knows that James almost never has a flush on the turn when he calls in that manner. Yeah, I mean, maybe going bigger is better.
Since I'm salty today, I couldn't disagree more. I think going bigger is just worse. And, the result of the hand at least gives some vindication to that, because James does fold. He tanks for a while and then folds the river.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's every time bank.
If James is not calling here with aces, the size of the bet probably is suspect.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because that's the best hand that Andy beats besides tens. I think obviously tens, but tens, whatever. Like, that's 3 combos. Aces, there's 6 combos.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to play the rest of the hand, but James uses all of his time banks and does find a very nice fold on the river with his aces.
We told them. They believe us, John. I don't know if I can. Yeah, there it is.
I wonder if he. Oh, wait. Is Andy way deeper than the 34K? Like, when he pulled his hands up, it just looked like he had. Oh, okay, no, never mind. 34K looks about right.
His glob of chips that he put out there were all his big ones.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because I was just thinking, like, in James's shoes, like, would you ever think about jamming the river? Obviously not when Andy only has a little bit like a min raise left behind, but that was my first instinct when.
Oh God, somehow we've made it to the other side where we're turning our aces with the ace of clubs into a bluff on the river.
Feels like one of the best bluffs.
We got to make it to the next segment. It probably is one of the best bluffs, honestly. But I think whatever. I just don't think that's probably in James's arsenal. I don't think it's the worst, but I also think that like James should have checked the turn, so we probably shouldn't even be in this situation that we're in. All right, so hand number 2 is going to be Hustler Casino. Going to look at a hand played by one G-Man. Stick around after the break. Check out Hustler live, coming right at you.
I'd say if you don't know your pre-flop ranges, then you will never be a winning player. And pre-flop bootcamp is just an amazing path to that. So the challenge of learning the strategies was really difficult, actually, because there's a lot of grids and it's a lot of information to take in. If I were to buy Preflop Boot Camp and it was just, here's a bunch of grids, go learn it, I would not have learned it. The fact that we had daily meetings and accountability partners and somebody that you felt responsible to was the fundamental linchpin for my desire and willingness to actually dig in and do the work. Once I had it to where I felt like I really had it down and I was actually able to use it and access the specific actions that I needed to in real time, it just turned into such a massive edge over the people that haven't studied that and that don't have those grids kind of in their mind already. So when I was able to talk to Coach Brad in office hours, and he was able to spell out the methodology and the work that he went through to actually put these grids together, it gave me a lot of confidence that I was learning something that was actually useful and that was going to show results at the tables. You know, the fact that you get to retake it over and over again ends up being a big deal too. I ended up taking it, I think 3 or 4 times. Before Preflop Bootcamp, I was a losing player. And after Preflop Bootcamp, I was able to show win rates and move up stakes repeatedly.
All right. Welcome back from the break. We now have G-Man on the screen. This is a hand that was played at the Hustler Live Casino and on the Hustler live stream. John, why were you so attracted to this hand? Why did this hand, you want to break this hand down?
Well, I mean, like both of these hands sort of made like highlight reels on Live at the Bike and Hustler Casino Live, and didn't want to play favorites on Tactical Tuesday, so made sure we hit one hand from each of the big LA streams.
There you go. And that's a good thought too. I have Wayne Shang, who's coming on the podcast, who runs the Live at the Bike stream, and so just equal opportunity, Tactical Tuesday breakdown.
Exactly. Yeah, non-discriminatory.
Yeah, we do it all.
Yeah.
So this hand involves one Garrett Adelstein. I'm not actually sure how to. I've heard it said many different ways.
I think he's talked about how to pronounce it, but anyway. So Gall opens.
Let's rein back because you consume so much more poker content than me that it's kind of sad. I haven't watched one Live at the Bike or one Hustler live stream ever in totality.
I don't really watch that much anymore, to be honest. But like back when I was playing live poker, I watched the Friday game, the big game, Live at the Bike, like religiously every Saturday morning. Like that would be my routines. Like wake up, spend like 2 hours watching like every single hand and like whatever. Now not so much, given that I play online and like the environment that I play in is just so different from what I mean. Not to say that I was playing like 5 million big blinds deep when I was playing live poker and like against guys of like G-Man, Andy, Gal's caliber, but like now it's just so different that I don't really feel compelled to watch it anymore. But yeah, I used to watch Live at the Bike Friday game just every single week.
Yeah,
it's like going to church or something.
It's fun to watch the high stakes games. If I'm going to watch any sort of poker content, high stakes cash games is the one that I would watch. G-Man here playing a bajillion dollars deep. He has Gal covered. Gal's got 88,000. He defends the big blind. He's straddled with a 9 and a 10 of different suits. Gal has the Jack 7 of hearts. There's there's $4,050 in the pot on the flop, and we get a flop that's okay for both players. The Jack of clubs, the 8 of spades, the 7 of diamonds. G-Man flops a straight, and Gal flops top and bottom pair.
They're not even that deep, to be fair. Like Gal is like
straddle to
400, so Gal is only a little bit.
So they're 200 big blinds deep.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're 200 big blinds deep, and there's an ante as well. So.
Yeah. Yep.
So we get a c-bet to 1,200 to start things out with the Jack 7, the top and the bottom pair. Any thoughts about the $1,200 c-bet, John?
Nope.
And actually, I was right. The pot was $2,850, and then Gall's c-bet 1,200.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fine size c-bet on this board. I assume that like Gall's just c-betting this size with most of his range on on this flop, and maybe just like in general on lots of flops. So not too much to comment on Galaxy bet sizing. I think like maybe what's a little bit more interesting to me is like Garrett's check raise size. In my opinion, it is on the smaller side, especially given how deep they are. But maybe he chooses to go smaller on really dry or pretty dry boards like Jack 8-7 Rainbow and maybe like paired boards as well. And maybe he picks larger sizes on more dynamic boards. But still, I think Galaxy betting 1,200 and Garrett check raising to 4,600 still does feel a little bit small to me. Like it's this size is not going to get stacks in by the river unless you're over betting somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's a little small too. I'm not exactly sure how Garrett's structuring his strategy here. I think bigger is better, but I don't know. Who knows? It is small though. Garrett check raises to 4,600, and Gall does make the call. He looks a little like he's looks a little sad here, in this still frame momentarily. I can't imagine that if you had top and bottom pair here against Garrett getting check raised on the flop that you would be feeling bad, because it's a pretty nice spot.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of understand it in the sense that like your hand is now just like a bluff catcher for the rest of the hand. Like you're not gonna ever raise. You're never like fist pumping, putting like all the money in. Yes, you're playing against Garrett, who just has like infinitely more bluffs than any normal poker player, I assume. But I can understand why he's not loving it.
If you got infinitely more bluffs than any other poker player, then you should love it when you have a bluff catcher.
Yeah, but you're also going to have to put in like 200 big blinds in the pot a lot of the time with top and bottom pair.
Yeah. What are we playing, man? We're playing poker, right? We just want to flop the nuts and get the money in every single time. Like that's a pretty boring game.
That's what Garrett seems to be doing with sand. I like that life does seem better to me.
It does. It does. We have the call on the flop. The turn is the queen of spades. There's $12,000 in the pot. Garrett, I don't know why I'm talking about how much money Garrett has. Garrett has 300,000 in front of him, and Gall has 83K. So his stack is, what's at risk here? The $83,000. So there's 12K in the pot. Queen of spades on the turn. So Garrett still has the nuts. I think the queen is somewhat interesting. It's an interesting turn card, specifically because if Garrett's check raising hands like Queen 9 or Queen 10, now he has top pair.
Brings backdoor spades in, which could definitely be related to like have some relevance to his check raising range if he's check raising like hands with backdoor flush draws, like I don't know, 5-6 of spades or 9-6 of spades, or even worse hands than that, like King 10 of spades or something like.
Yeah, if he doesn't 3-bet King 10 of spades pre.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
That's a pretty big part of it. So Garrett with 12K in the pot, Garrett's just going to bet, and Garrett overbets a turn, sticks in 15,000. How do you feel about Garrett's sizing here, John?
This is it's interesting. So it's 1.25. It's like 1.25x plot. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm sure a lot of this has to do like one thing that I know is that like Garrett and Gall for sure have like a lot of like live history. I'm sure they've played like tons and tons of hands together. Like Gall was like a reg on like the old Live at the Bike stream before before Hustler Casino Live even existed. I'm sure they played a gazillion hours even off stream. So I'm assuming like the size has a lot to do with like history and what Garrett has done versus Gall recently or just like in the past after he's check raised flop, like the sizes that he picks on the turn. I've seen this line like used even online where like people over check raise flop and then overbet turn, which sort of makes sense, right? Like the idea being that like your flop check raise range is going to be very polar. It's going to be polarized to like really strong hands like sets and two pairs and straights, and then the bottom end of that is just going to be your bluffs or your draws. And if you polarize on the flop, like it makes sense to continue doing so on the turn and river with those hands. And when overcard peels, like you can now maybe get like weak top pairs on the flop to consider folding. So it's tough to say like exactly like whether this is like good or bad. I'm just gonna assume it's good because I'm sure Garrett has like a way better understanding of like how this play is going to be perceived by someone he plays against with a lot than I do.
Yeah, I think it's really good, to be honest. I think that, the last hand we saw Andy not raise the flop when he flopped top set. I think here, like once Gall continues on the flop, Garrett's just polarizing again and knows that like Gall can have a lot of strong hands here that are now bluff catchers and there's really nothing he can do. So just sizing up with the 9-10 specifically. And I mean, Garrett could have hands like King 10 off or Ace 10 off as well. I think those hands make a lot of sense here where he check raises the flop with the gut shot and then, Ace 10 turns double gut shot and King 10 turns open ender. I think those hands are just like natural, it's very natural continues at this size. So like Garrett's strategy here seems to be really good. And, what else you expect from G-Man?
Yeah. What do you think about the size that he chooses to overbet? Like overbetting, I think just makes sense, but like, why not like 1.5x or like 2x pot? Is there you think there's like some differentiation between those and like 1.25, especially when you're so deep? Like even this overbet doesn't set up for stacks on the river. Maybe that's not something he cares about, but
I think you're foreshadowing a little bit, but I would say you're wrong.
We
can foreshadow a little bit, but I do think you are wrong that it doesn't set up for stacks. This is no limit Texas Hold'em where you have no cap on the size that you're allowed to bet. And so
I think that's a good point. Like I sort of have this obsession, or like I think a lot of players have this obsession with like setting up for stacks on the river when like you don't need to, right? You don't need to have less than pot or like pot on the river, and especially in no limit to
Yeah. I mean, it's a mistake that I see in private coaching sessions all the time where it's like, where somebody like wants to put 2 bets in and when they're out of position. And so they like bet the turn so that they can jam the river when the SPR is like 1.5. And it's like, you can check to like induce. And if it goes check and villain has lots of bluff catchers, like you can just overbet jam the river. Like that's the totally viable option that just for some reason people just like don't see. And I think that like, this is a game you have overbets, so you can just put the money in on the river if you so choose. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not, again, I don't know exactly the sizing would be how Garrett is structuring his full strategy here. And since Garrett does have river jams and maybe he wants to have a bigger bet left on the river with his King 10 and Ace 10 so that he can have more fold equity. And so like maybe that's a part of why he chooses this $15,000 sizing. So again, I think like Garrett, it's likely just very high level strategy construction here.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you would want to have like the super meaty river size available to you when you have your bluffs.
Right. Because again, like we say, we're playing a full range here. We're not just playing the hand in front of us. We're playing a strategy in our full range, and I think full range probably wants to have that big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He gets, Gall calls the turn with his 2 pair, and I think there's really nothing to speak of there. He's just again, he's just kind of strapped in and ready for the ride at this point.
Gotta hold on.
Yeah, he's got to hold on. There's nothing he can do. There's 42K in the pot, and Gall has 68,000, so about 1.5-ish, 1.6-ish. SPR, stack to pot ratio here on the river. Garrett is out of position. Gall. So for the podcast listener, I don't know if we said the river. The river's a 7 of spades. So Gall makes a full house. The 7 of spades also completes backdoor spades. So the final board is Jack 8-7, Queen of spades, 7 of spades. So there's a spade flush draw available, and now Gall makes a full house. So here, something strange happens. Garrett is going to grab a bunch of $5,000 chips and stick them in the middle there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel uncomfortable like saying someone who's like definitely way better than me at poker and way better than me at live poker is doing something that I just don't
And look at the
understand.
guy.
Don't
He
agree with.
he could just pummel you into a pulp on the
Yeah.
sidewalk too, you know?
Hey man, I've been doing pull-ups, man.
Yeah. I know where my money's at.
I don't like this play, man. I mean, Raul has every boat. He has quads. There's nothing about his range here that is uncapped. The only reason that I can think of to bet this size is that like Garrett is just gonna be perceived to have like so many bluffs when he takes this line that like a hand like Queen Jack or like aces or kings is really just gonna have to seriously think about calling the size and putting the money in. Um, Even then, that seems a little ambitious with like 1 point bigger than 1.5x pot on the river that you're getting called by worse frequently. But again, maybe he just knows that he has so many bluffs, or he's perceived to have so many bluffs that those two pair hands are gonna call.
So I've gone back and forth with this river decision in my mind, and Garrett. What's interesting about the spot is that I think when Garrett chooses his turn sizing, he knows what his river strategy is going to be in advance. His play is going to be to jam. I think that's pretty clear by the fact that he still jammed on a card that is really bad for his exact hand. But is this card really bad for Garrett's range? And Garrett's going to have boats here. Garrett will have some backdoor spades, and I think ace 10 and king 10 are still going to be jamming on this card specifically. So Garrett does have natural bluffs. The really a big factor here is like if you check, what are you checking? And if you check, you kind of are forced to be checking range if you're Garrett. And
Well,
is checking range a thing you would like to do? I don't think so.
you could bet smaller.
You could, so you're betting small with your whole range of ace 10 and king 10?
I don't know. Do you have to be like balanced in that way necessarily? Like maybe I mean it definitely is better to be balanced in that way, I think, but like I don't know. This is live poker. Like if you want to try to get called by like Queen Jack and aces and kings, like couldn't you just bet like 28K on the river or something like that and with like your straights and just go really big with your boats and your bluffs?
I mean, this is 50, 100, 200, and
400.
two extremely, 50, 100, 200, 400 with two extremely high level players.
Yeah.
To kind of throw away sound strategy construction for an exploit, I don't know how advised that is. I think the safe thing to do is kind of what Garrett does, even though that kind of seems a little absurd.
Yeah.
The safe decision is just to jam range, because in that way, he knows that he just knows that like he's jamming with his range here, and that he thinks that strategy is going to make money over the long term, even though his exact hand is a hand that doesn't really want to jam the river.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, when I first saw it, I thought I didn't like it at all. But now, really thinking about the spot Garrett is in, this is not a great spot for him on the river with his exact hand. And from a strategy standpoint, maybe he does get called by worse when he jams. I'm not sure. I'm specifically not sure that he get calls by worse when he jams because of how long it takes Gall to call the river. Gall goes in the tank for quite a while before calling with, his full house, which leads me to believe that like aces ain't too thrilled about calling the all in on the river here.
Right.
Which says, that's really good for Garrett's king 10 and ace 10, the bluffs that he has in his range, and maybe even 8-9 or 8-10. Like maybe he decides to like check raise those and kind of go for it with those kind of hands too. The bluff portion of his range is doing well. Again, like this specific hand just puts him in a quandary, and you can't just check like this one hand. That you're checking range here. That's really what we're kind of struggling with, or what I'm struggling with anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still gonna say that it's like like when you're playing live poker and like it's like how are you gonna get punished like in the spot for like betting like 28K with this hand, and just jamming like the really good hands and the bad hands? Like is it really something that's like gonna come back to like bite you? Like even if you're playing like lots and lots of hours with with call or with whichever opponent you're choosing to exploit, like these spots, it's not like these spots like come up like all the time, or maybe they do for someone like Garrett who just check raises and bombs like turns and rivers a lot. But yeah, I don't know.
There's safety in playing a strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
There's safety in just constructing a very sound strategy and playing your strategy, no matter what, because that, ultimately at the end of the day, over the course of your life, if you play very high level strategies in all of these spots, you will be a winning player and you will make a lot of money playing this game.
Yeah.
So changing that I don't know. I don't know if the trade-off is worth it. I mean, 9-10 is highly incentivized to size down. And so, but do you want to size down with King 10 and Ace 10? Probably not.
Right.
So like if you size down with 9-10, okay, cool. You have like one hand in your range here that you're betting, and that's just not good. That I don't think that cuts it when you're playing nosebleed stakes, even live poker.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think like, just another argument for what you're saying and maybe what Garrett was thinking was that like, while this hand, like maybe like it's reasonable, or like maybe, you're not going to get punished, but like also like this hand is streamed, right? So like everyone's going to see it. And, if they know that like, okay, you size down with like 9-10 here and you're jamming your boats and your bluffs, then like that's way more people that are going to see this than just the people at the table.
I don't think Garrett's concerned about that, to be honest.
Okay.
He does enough weird things that like people watching are like, what the hell just happened here? Like he does go out on limbs and he does do a lot of weird things. I think it's evident that Garrett respects Gall's strategy construction and his ability as a poker player.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately what, kind of led him to just play his strategy here instead of playing his exact hand.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah.
And that's it.
Garrett does put in the 70K. Should we show the call?
Sure. We'll show the call.
It takes a while. I mean, which is understandable. It's 150 big blinds without, you don't exactly have the nuts, and Garrett can definitely have better hands than yours.
Yeah. There's the call, and Garrett just gives his little nice hand.
Definitely looked a little unhappy, but not shocked or anything, right?
No, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. What Gall has. So, yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Tactical Tuesday. I know that I mentioned it in this week's newsletter, but in the next 4 to 8 months, I'm going to be starting a stable called the CPG Wolves. I have an application. It's in the Chasing Poker Greatness community, Greatness Village. So if you are interested in being a CPG Wolf 4 to 8 months down the line, you need to hop on the newsletter. You need to get in the village and put your name on the wait list, because that is where I'll be taking applicants from. I think it's time to build a team, time to get out there in the streets and throwing down with these CPG strategies. So I'm excited for that project because, of course, I need more things to do. I don't have enough to do in my life than manage a stable.
You have like 15 jobs right now, honestly.
I do. I'm just hoping like one of my jobs just blows up to the point to where I can say, forget all you other jobs. I'm just going to do this one. But yeah, man, it's been good breaking these hands down. If y'all like these hand breakdowns from the high stakes cash game streams, let us know and we can do more in the future. And with that said, John, tell them bye-bye.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to Chasing Poker Greatness. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com to get the newsletter. Join the Greatness Village community, book a coaching session, or dive into the latest data-driven poker courses. Follow the show on Twitter @CPG Podcast.